this slight technical glitch. I was having problems accessing the floor. It's my great pleasure to open the final session of the annual meeting, and it's my even greater pleasure to welcome the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Amina Mohammed, to provide some opening comments on the way ahead. Madam Deputy Secretary General, the virtual floor is yours.
Good morning, Vittorino. Good morning, all. I hope you can hear me. This is a new platform for us, so excuse us if we're having trouble with the technology. But Excellencies, our distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends, it's a real pleasure to be with you today. And I was just listening to the end of the last session, which talked about the financing, an important part of what we want to do. I do want to begin by acknowledging that we condole with all those reported deaths of up to 25 migrants and refugees off the coast of Venezuela this week, and the that is another sad reflection of some of the challenges that we face on a daily basis, where the loss of lives is of course tragic and unacceptable, and we work towards ending that. 2020 has been one of the most difficult years that the United Nations has faced in its 75th history. But across the board, the UN system has risen to the challenge, including the United Nations Migration Network, and we really applaud your efforts. You responded rapidly to the COVID-19, speaking out for the rights of vulnerable migrants, supporting those who have been stranded, and you've also provided important analysis, insights, and policy guidance that have helped governments better address the consequences of the pandemic for migrants and migration, but also their invaluable contribution to the fight against COVID-19. And you've done this while advancing your core responsibilities to support the Global Compact for Migration, developing comprehensive guidance on implementation and expanding UN coordination on migration at country and regional levels. This has advanced the Compact Champions Initiative, operationalized the Migration Fund, and facilitated strong stakeholder engagement, preparing for the first round of regional reviews. The key task now will be to leverage this solid groundwork to make migration work for all over the coming years. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to highlight what I see as three key opportunities. First, that we have seen growing support for the Compact over the last 2 years. Governments have started to engage with the Compact as a tool that adds value to all it can to keep this political momentum going through into 2021 and the recovery. The Compact Champion Initiative is an excellent vehicle in this regard, and I wish to commend those member states that have joined it already. Drawing on the regional processes and the build-up to the first Global Migration Review Forum in 2022, network members can support these countries to translate their commitments into concrete changes and improved outcomes for migrants. My second thoughts would be in 2021, we see many governments seeking to kickstart a rapid economic recovery. And as they do so, it's essential that they respond to the fragilities the crisis has exposed and support greater inclusion, sustainability, justice, and resilience in all communities. Recovery strategies must be aligned with agreed international frameworks, including, of course, the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. Ensuring that vaccines and treatments are accessible to all is the first step. And I encourage the Migration Network to prioritize supporting governments to ensure that vaccines reach migrants and make improved migration outcomes a key feature of their recovery plans. The UN Socioeconomic Response and Recovery Plans and the new generation of UN Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks are key tools for this recovery in our engagement with governments. We must also continue to support the full operation of the Migration Fund. This has already shown its ability to bring the Compact to life, to support the SDGs, and to enhance the coherence of the UN system. And I would urge all donors to sustain and expand their engagement and encourage all states to help broaden the donor base. The third opportunity lies in strengthening United Nations support on the regional dimensions of migration. The issue-based coalitions that are emerging as part of the UN development system reforms can offer a solid platform in tandem with other regional and sub-regional coordination mechanisms. We must support governments to address the many complex migration-related challenges that they face in their regions. And these include the situation in Central America, human trafficking in the Sahel, the rollout of the African Union Protocol on free movement of persons, and migration related to climate change. We must also look more closely at how our support for the Global Compact on migration interacts with and complements our support for Global Compact on refugees. We must ensure that we are addressing the many issues that affect migrants, refugees, and other displaced persons in a coordinated and complementary way. Excellencies, under the able coordination of the International Organization of Migration and its leadership, the Migration Network, we are building a more collaborative approach to migration across the United Nations system. Your leadership has succeeded in building trust, deepening cooperation between individual UN entities, and optimizing the range of expertise and mandates on migration within the system. Let's continue to advance in this spirit, minimizing bureaucracy, drawing on the entire UN family's expertise and lived experiences, and making implementation of the Global Compact for Migration the driving force behind our collective work on migration. I wish you the very best with your deliberations and happy holidays. Thank you.
So much. I know that you have a very busy agenda today, and we appreciate very much that you took some time off to be with us. You were at the launch on the MPDF. I think that we can be proud of what we have achieved in terms of implementation of the GCM, and we want to be accountable before you, showing that your engagement and your support has been well used by us. May I just ask you one question? One very brief question on a key specific issue. I think that one of the great challenges that we have in front of us is making sure that the post-pandemic economic recovery is fully aligned with the SDGs. Because we are entering the decade of action. This pandemic was disruptive, and we need to go back to the right track. How can you see our contribution from the migration side to the current objective of the UN system for building back better, as the Secretary General has stated?
Thank you, Vitorino. Well, at the core of the work that we do are people, and people include migrants. The frameworks that we have, the tools that we have exist, the 2030 Agenda, the Compact for migrants. And so what I see is tackling the issues that we have right up front. We've got the issue of getting a vaccine to everyone, because that really begins to see the end of lockdowns, begins to see the return of people in the economy, in the essential services that have to be provided to achieve the SDGs. So I think first and foremost, with the UN system on the ground, is to ensure that we implement within the context of the 2030 Agenda all these plans that we have, working very closely with government. Government has stimulus plans. Yes, there are fiscal gaps there, and we look to see how we can leverage more resources into governments. But within those plans, I think it is very important that we ensure that everyone is included, and where there are challenges to help government bring migrants, refugees, internally displaced persons, everyone into ensuring they benefit from the responses and, of course, the recovery. This does help to put us back on track. COVID putting a pause on the world did not put a pause on climate change. It did not put a pause on the humanitarian crisis that we see with migrants. And so therefore, it's important that we use any investments that are going to be made now to be as inclusive as we can and to ensure that migrants are included.
Thank you so much. The floor is open. I will be willing to take other questions while we have Amina with us. I don't control this new technology, to be honest with you. So I don't know if someone has asked for the floor. I will just try to put another complementary question. We all know that there is a strong commitment from the UN system in terms of guaranteeing that the objectives and the targets of the Paris Agreement are achieved. You have had a very important meeting on the Climate Change Ambition Summit last week, if I'm not wrong. And definitely we are concerned with the impacts of climate change in human mobility and human displacement. Can we be encouraged by what you heard from the Climate Ambition Summit about what's going to happen in the next few months in this respect?
Yes, I think as a whole, I would say yes. I want to be optimistic about the signals that we've received. The Secretary General's call for the net zero commitments from our big emitters, I think has been heard, and we saw many commitments to that coming forth. So the longer term ambitions, we are seeing the commitments going in the right direction. However, in order to get to those longer term commitments in 2050, we have to look at the 2030 targets that we've set. And that means investments now, in fact, investments yesterday, but investments now in the 2030 agenda, in the green transitions, in ensuring that we are seeing climate not just as an issue of borders in a country, but cross-border, through regions, across regions. And that's where, the rubber hits the road with us recognizing that migrants are a big part of this, both in terms of trying to solve the root causes of forced migration, but also, and then taking advantage of migration that is a good thing for many countries and for communities and for countries. So right now, I would say that the climate meetings that ended this year on a high note of ambition. We will go into 2021 with a very strong roadmap to trying to ensure that NDCs in the short term meet the investments for 2030 that will also align with the 2030 agenda, while trying to meet those longer term targets that will, in fact, as they say, bend the curve and get to our 1.5 degree world that we are all striving towards.
So that you can count on us in that respect. I have one question from the floor. It will be, we have time for one more question?
Yes.
From Michelle Lighton from ILO. Michelle.
I did not actually request the floor. I think that was from the fact that I'll take over afterwards, but thank you very much. And thank you.
So let me just say, Fitorino, I just saw a lady pop up from the ILO, and just one advice. Whenever a woman is given space anywhere today, grab it and say what you need to say, because we are in so few spaces, and what we're trying to do is just expand that. But I just want to say that the support from the ILO this year has been extraordinary. The leadership there has ensured that social protection, the idea that we do a green transition, is not to the exclusion of the labor force. And so therefore people and jobs, particularly young people, have been a main feature. And we look very much forward to 2021 working with you on this.
Thank you so much. You are absolutely right. If I did not ask the floor, I would nevertheless put a question. I mean, I want to thank you for the time you have spent with us, and you can go on counting on us, and we wish you all the luck. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, yes, I give the floor to Michelle, I guess.
Yes, thank you. You see, I actually do have the floor for the next hour and a half. So I'm not going to be too disadvantaged. That's right. No, thank you. Thank you very much. That was those were very inspiring words for us to begin this next session on emerging challenges and priorities. For those of you who are listening in, I am required to give you a few technical notes just to make this session run more smoothly. By clicking on the white button labeled floor on the left, you'll see that you have access to English, French, and Spanish. If you keep it on the floor, it will be the original language. If you're not on the floor, you will be muted because all participants are muted until I call your names on a list of speakers. Then please do request the floor, and you will be given ability to turn on your microphone. And we would encourage you to please turn on your videos before you speak. Don't click on the release the mic button or you will be taken off the floor. And as you make your intervention, please do introduce yourself and your organization. For those of you who will not be taking the floor or just want to follow along, please note that in the chat box, you can post documents. There will be also documents listed in the documents box. I hope that suffices for now for the introductions in terms of technical issues. And please note that if I am looking down, it's because I'm on the phone to look at who is in line to speak and hopefully be able to give you the floor. So let me introduce myself. Michelle Layton. I'm Chief of the Labor Migration Branch for the International Labor Organization. And I'm really happy to be here today. And I really would like to thank the Director General and the network, the Secretariat, for the enormous work that has gone into this annual meeting in the past years, work that we have done in these extraordinary times. ILO very much values our partnership and cooperation with the UN network. Now, as I mentioned, our session is on emerging challenges and priorities. So as has been reflected, we are doing this in some of the most unprecedented times many of us will see in our lifetime. The world of work is in the deepest crisis that we have witnessed, and migrant workers are some of the most vulnerable. Many continue to live in very fragile situations. The pandemic has taught us many lessons, of course, and certainly one has been the exposure of the real deficiencies that continue in migration governance. These are deficiencies that the Global Compact has sought to address. And sadly, as this year has played out, we see that it has exacerbated the deeply entrenched attitudes of discrimination and exclusion. This week, I should mention, the ILO released a report on the stark realities of this discrimination. Migrant workers are receiving 30 to 40% less in some countries in their wages in the same occupations as nationals, 30 to 40% less. And much of this is happening in high-income countries. The inequalities that migrants are experiencing are also increasing, and some of the early evidence is dramatically showing this. So the network, since its inception, we think is rightly placed its compass on trying to assist those most disadvantaged and vulnerable to call for the protection of the rights of migrants, including their labor rights, especially noting the impacts we've seen on forced returns, alternatives to detention that the network has provided guidance on, and other issues. And we're going to be releasing early next year the first UN system-wide guidance on bilateral agreements, which we think can also inform the regional integration processes. Now, we know countries are already struggling with socioeconomic inclusion of migrants and their reintegration. And this will continue to be a pressing avenue for our joint work. We've heard some of that described in the last session. So today, I'm delighted that we're going to hear from diverse perspectives on some of the most pressing issues, and I encourage you all to participate. Some of the issues that are coming to the fore, disasters and climate change. We've heard the DSG mention this, and I'm sure that our panelists will be beginning with a discussion on that, among many other issues. So let me remind that this session has a few priorities to focus on for us in this particular last session of the annual network. What are those emerging priorities from your standpoint, from your perspective? How can the network's champion countries and the network work better together to collaborate on the Global Compact? How do we get the most out of the regional review processes? One has already happened, others will go on next year. And what are the ways we can strengthen your participation, meaningful stakeholder engagement in these processes? Now, I'd like to turn to our panel. I hope that we're able to have our panelists turn on their videos, and I look to Ben, who might be able to help, because I'm going to call on you, but it would be great to have your faces. Thank you very much, Hervé. I see you. Yes, and Pedro, very nice. We will have others joining us, but I would like to just remind our panelists that you have agreed to take the floor for 5 minutes. We have a large list of speakers, which is very good, but just to give everyone time. And speakers from the floor, you will have 3 minutes. There will be a timer presented in this session, and please accept my apologies in advance if I have to interrupt. If it goes on much further beyond, it takes the time from everyone being able to participate. So thank you so much for looking at the clock and sticking to the time. Without further ado, I would like to begin with Mr. Ove Sarman, the Deputy Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. You have the floor. Thank you.
Make sure that you can hear me. Can you hear me? Great. Wonderful to see you, Michelle. It's been a long time. And it's a great pleasure for me to participate in this particular event with IOM, with the organization I've had a long relationship with. And first, I'd like to acknowledge and appreciate the Director General of IOM, who's listening, I hope. And it's a great pleasure for me to share our perspective. So I'll be very brief. To start with, from our perspective, from the Climate Change Organization Secretariat perspective, despite the brief dip that we have seen in the recent months due to COVID, we head towards a temperature rise about 3 degrees by the end of the century. And that is double the goal of Paris Agreement. And that is not good. A green pandemic recovery can cut around 25% of the emissions predicted in 2030 and move us close to 2 degrees pathway if we are doing things in the right way. We are hopeful, given the recent pledges by many governments. Reducing the emissions to is the single most important thing we must do to combat climate emergency. However, even if we cut all emissions right now, climate impacts will continue to worsen, driving many people around the world through displacement and other impacts, humanitarian and beyond. And because already today, at 1.2 degrees warming, people around the world face serious challenges because of the combination of structural inequalities on the one hand and climate change. The risks and implications of what we are seeing, in addition to reducing emissions, we need to ensure that people are safe from the negative effects of climate change, that they can access the means and knowledge to implement their own solutions to adapt, very importantly, and that the most vulnerable people are protected. Among the people who are most exposed to climate risk, both slow onset and sudden hazards, are farmers, especially women, elderly people and children, and many of those migrants who are forced to live in unsafe conditions, like in low-lying areas of cities and informal settlements. In fact, the IDMC report that was published last year estimates that 33 million people displaced last year. Almost 70% of those, 24 million, were displaced due to the weather-related hazards, especially floods and storms. Combined with structural inequalities, climate change impacts have a multiplier effect in eroding the chances for sustainable development and resilience for many exposed people around the world, while on the other hand, and this is very important, addressing climate change can effectively lead to multiple co-benefits. And that's what we promote, that's what we advocate for. And I'm very pleased to see that GCM identifies climate change impacts among the multiple drivers of migration, and that it recognizes that mitigation and adaptation measures need to be prioritized. Under our process, UNFCCC process, parties emphasize the importance of policy coherence. I believe this includes development, disaster reduction, adaptation, and resilience. The GCM refers to the Paris Agreement, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, 2030 Agenda, as also mentioned by the DSG just now, and the Sendai Framework. Coherence across these spheres is critical to ensure meaningful guidance and action. At the time when the Paris Agreement was adopted 5 years ago, we just celebrated 5th anniversary, the COP established the Task Force on Displacement, whose members include IOM, UNHCR, ILO, UNDP, governments and civil society representatives. The recommendations of the task force align with the GCM principles in two important areas: addressing climate change-related factors contributing to human mobility and ensuring integration in national policy and planning. Specifically, for its 2021 work plan, I would like to invite the network to consider the following. Include thematic work on climate change and migration, which could include creating a multi-stakeholder working group. To include references to the national adaptation plans and the Paris Agreement in the guidance and capacity building efforts of the UN country and regional teams and member states. And finally, working with the GCM champion countries to undertake joint analysis and developing guidance to promote the implementation of the principles of GCM and the recommendations of the task force. Let me conclude by assuring everyone that we from UNFCCC Secretariat stand ready to support the network on these suggestions. Colleagues and friends, we at UNFCCC are with you to support the achievement of the principles of the GCM, which we fully understand and appreciate, especially to protect the most vulnerable people, to prevent displacement, especially irregular migration, and to prepare for safe, dignified, and regular pathways for migration that will ensure a sustainable and climate-resilient future for all. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you very much for those words and references to so many important issues, not just rapid onset, but slow onset disasters, the work that you're doing in collaboration with the UNCCD, and of course the task force on displacement, which is very important. And we see the GCM has provisions related to the Climate Change Convention, but also in the task force recommendations adopted by the COP, also the playback to the network. So thank you for suggesting that it's now time to really get that collaboration going. I'd like now to turn to Mr. Pedro de Vasconcelos, Manager of Financing Facility for Remittances of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Michelle. I have put the clock. I'm going to try to make it under 5 minutes. As you know, COVID-19 pandemic continues to slam into countries with the impact of a natural disaster. It is a reality, and unlike most disasters, COVID affects the entire world at once. And this is no black swan event, yet this calamity still caught us all by surprise. And here we are, almost 10 months after governments everywhere reacted with rapidly devised policies, restrictions, and measures that aim to mitigate the worst effects of this threat. But the continuing socioeconomic fallout of this contingent demands urgent action, and this is, I think, in the key message. Tens of millions of jobs are lost, as we said, some permanently, and migrant workers suffer from some of the most direct impacts of this crisis. Their employment levels and wages have plummeted, and lacking access to unemployment benefits, many are unable to send money home to support their families. Last year, international remittances reached a record $548 billion. Half of these flows went to rural communities in developing countries. So it's over 200 million migrants supporting 800 million family members with remittances sent back home. That's the reality we're talking about. And as you all know, these flows or family aid are 3 times greater than ODA and FDI. We keep saying it, but it's important to understand it. And for millions of families, these flows are nothing less than a lifeline. They support basic needs, put food on the table, paying bills. They build human capital and economic opportunities by sending children to school, support businesses and other productive outlets. So in other words, it's safe to say that these flows sent back home regularly enable millions of families to reach their own sustainable development goals. So this said, the projected slide on remittance flows could roll back decades of progress on the SDGs, including poverty reduction, income inequality, nutrition, health, education, and many more. And the World Bank specifically estimated that the fallback for this year, the decline was 7.2% since March, and actually putting this lifeline at risk. So indeed, most migrants have less to send to families, and many have none, having been forced to return home. And we need to understand that. So for those who still have an income, many of the channels used to send and receive remittances have been curtailed. As we all know, this has impacted the life of millions rural families who are digitally and financially excluded, with less access to mobile money, savings, credit, and insurance products. From a key perspective for IFAD, this decline in remittances has been a productive blow to agriculture and other enterprises, as well as remittances on the right seeds and inputs to local economic activities. So in light of this, the question at stake is what has been done, and more importantly, what can be done. As you know, last March, IFAD launched the Remittances Community Task Force in response to the Secretary General call for global solidarity on the coronavirus crisis. At that time, the RCTF and its 40 members, including private sector, and actually 6 UN Migration Network members, such as IFAD, of course, IOM, UNCDF, UN Women, UNSCWA, and the World Bank, of course, started working on identifying actionable short, medium, and long-term solutions to the current challenges created by the COVID-19. And this initial work presented the backbone for the first release of the policy brief by the UN Migration Network called The Impact of COVID-19 on Family Remittances, a Lifeline Cut for Migrant Families. So, as you know, the Migration Network policy guidance was further supported and developed under the leadership of IFAD with support of ILO, IOM, OHCHR, UNICEF, UN Women, and the World Bank, of course. And it was released on the occasion of the International Day of Family Remittances on this past June 16. So the first achievement of this report, I think, that was released is that the findings also fed the menu of policy options of the financing for development in the era of COVID-19 and beyond, launched by the Secretary General, the Prime Minister of Canada, as well as Prime Minister of Jamaica, and was presented on September 29th during the high-level meeting of heads of state and governments of over 60 countries, I believe. So 2 days ago, I'm happy to say that the final version of this policy options and their linked best practices were released by the task force that has continued to work on them. And going forward, the findings are now to contribute to the discussion on remittances during the 2021 Italian presidency of the G20 through the work of the Global Partnership on Financial Inclusion. And I think this is a testament for the actions that can be done at global level and collaboratively. So this final product to action is calling now for key challenges impeding the progress towards our dear goal of cheaper, faster, and safer access to remittances. It also contains the issues in enabling environment, and it looks at actions immediate to 6 to 12 months. I will invite to check the latest of this for the sake of time. I'll just ask one more minute, if I may. Summing up, the message, I think, is that with greater access to remittances and financial literacy in rural finance or rural families in rural areas will have more options and resources to invest in their small businesses and farm, thereby improving food security, number of decent jobs, increasing income, in short, resilience. And I think this is a key stakeout on this. Most importantly, this crisis has validated the vital importance of this group and many others of partnerships, really under SDG 17, the need to bring together key stakeholders from public and private sector, that's extremely important, and the civil society to address the pressing development. So now it is really time to move from dialogue to implementation of concrete measures in line again with the UN goals and principles of safer, cheaper, and faster remittances, and in the spirit of SDG 17. This group, I think, is well placed to promote closer collaboration and implementation actions between its members with relevant expertise in the field and leverage UN member states to support this crucial topic. I'll finish just saying that we have already started at IFAD addressing several of these key impediments in the remittances ecosystem with partners like the World Bank, European Union. We're tackling what we call the remittance data gap to better support remittance service providers, particularly in African countries. We're also launching call for proposals to bring innovative private sector solutions to bear. But in my conclusion, I would like to say that within our commitment to doing our part to ensure that this hard-earned money creates greater resilience, as I mentioned, and a brighter future for rural communities, we can call upon the Migration Network members to do the same and act as one in this global effort. Thank you very much, Michelle, for the time allowed. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. I know you were making some key points about the fact that millions of dollars in remittances have been lost, and that's not coming back for last year for the families of migrants who are suffering, and that's going to put them in deficit even as they move into the next year. And of course, from our perspective, we also see Some have paid high recruitment fees and costs for their jobs. They're in debt already, and this is going to be very, very difficult. So a key issue to raise. I see now we have a couple of our other panelists who have joined. I thought I saw Hakima Haithar, the coordinator of the Global Coalition on Migration. Has she joined, Ben? I see Verina's now on, but I think I may have lost my view of her being on. Oh, there's Verina. Okay, good. Well, Verina, if we can turn to, Verina Naus is the Chief of Migration and Displacement for UNICEF, and very, very glad you could join us, Verina.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can you hear me? Excellent. So this came quicker than I thought. I just thought I'm happily sitting here and listening to Hakima and then react to more food for thought. There was already so much of it from the previous speakers, but let me seize the chance, and thanks, Michelle, for chairing us here today, and thank you for the invitation to speak. In the spirit of this panel, looking back and looking ahead specifically to next year, I sort of took a moment of reflection and thought, what struck me listening to the discussions that we had on Tuesday, what we had on Monday, and then yesterday, and then earlier today, and what are some of the reflections that one can have at the end of another year, and what a year it was. I mean, we've already heard about the tremendous challenges, about the sort of reminders on a day-to-day basis of how far the exclusion gap is when it comes to migrants in all kinds of settings, and how huge the risks are. Another reflection, obviously, is that I think this year we all had our own shared sense of what it feels like when you can't move. Lockdown was probably for some of us the first time we realized what it means when borders close, when family members are in a different country, different continent, and you can't reach them. You can't just jump on a plane. So things we take for granted suddenly were no longer a reality that was within reach for everyone. But that is, of course, so much more the reality for migrants around the world who get shut out through visa restrictions, through the lack of family-friendly policies, labor agreements that exclude family members, borders that close. The second reflection, obviously, as I think back is, what has been our collective impact as members of the network and really the broader community? The network is a collective us. It's us plus, because so many actors have been feeding into the conversations. And how do we measure impact even in the first place? And it's not to be measured in the number of statements we made or tweets or even guidance tools we put out. But the question is, did we inform and shape the debates this year? Did we adapt quick enough to the new realities that COVID brought and the world around it? Did we deliver for and with migrants and for and with member states? Did we answer questions they had at the time when they raised them? And were we really at the right table, at the right moment when decisions were taken? And that, in my view, is impact. Being at the right table, responding when needed, shaping the debate, not just being part of them, but shaping them. So we all probably have our own views on this question in terms of how impact can be measured and how much impact we did have. But looking ahead now, I think, Michelle, to what you asked us to do, really, 2021. Where do we want to be at the end of next year? If we reconvene again in a year from now, I'm sure we all agree we want to see each other again in life, in real life. So we probably have, if we're lucky, a combination of a face-to-face real life event where we can actually drink coffees together and chit-chat in the halls, and take forward the experience of the virtual formats that allow so many more partners to join the conversation. But where do we really want to be in terms of impact, in terms of, what lessons do we want to learn and apply next year? I think Jonathan set us up at the very first day. How can we be more agile, more adaptive? And how do we adapt both our ways of working, but also starting with changing our ways of thinking? Because we obviously, the way we act is how we rationalize our contribution and the purpose of the network. So having listened carefully to what had been said yesterday, the day before, and just now, I wanted to maybe put 3 suggestions on the table and reflections for next year. I think the first one is really about, we are a network. It exists now. So this is really, I think, an achievement. And really it's thanks to the hard work and the investment made by, obviously the team in the network secretariat, and real kudos to them. But it's also the investment made by everyone that contributed and engaged and debated, and the agencies that invested, the partners, the stakeholders. So now we are a network. But do we act as a network is the question. So I would like us to switch from being a network to really, truly acting like a network. And what does that mean? What is the value add of a network? It's connecting people, ideas, and solutions. It's being a broker, a platform, an enabler. And it's really catering to all the diverse interests and needs and interests and expertise that everybody can bring. So in my view, one key recommendation for being and acting like a network is that we need an empowered secretariat. We need a secretariat that can both coordinate us so that we can be the broker and networker and platform, but that has the technical knowledge and know-how to steer and support us, to get the best out of all of us and have a vision that they can deliver on. Because that, I think, would be the key to switch. The second point and reflection for next year is, grounded on the trust that we have built and the fact that no matter what we do, we are a family, right? UN agencies, we're like the uncles and the aunts. We are bound together in destiny, which means that we need to be comfortable with disagreement and in a way embrace divergence of opinion and engage constructively in battling it out. And really, I think the point I want to make is resist the temptation to try and paper over our different views with lofty, jargony, UN-y language that just makes us feel good and pleases us, but makes us say nothing anymore. And I think here, just 2 quick examples. On detention. No, there is no agreed definition on alternatives to detention. And on returns, there's huge discomfort in accepting the legitimacy of returns. Or on the GCM itself. It is a totally ambiguous document. It doesn't answer all the questions it raises. But do we need a definition? Do we need to agree on everything? Do we need the GCM to resolve all our disagreements? Now, this brings me to the last point, Michelle, and I'm looking at the clock. I'm at the end. Embracing this disagreement means that, when we do this, and as Amina challenged us to optimize the range of expertise available, I think we can become better at being both relevant, having the impact, making migration work for all, and really deliver to member states and for and with migrants. So what does it mean? I think let's stretch ourselves a little more to really be more responsive to the audience we serve, migrants and member states. And member states, I mean local authorities included. Our colleague Emilia Saiz very strongly reminded us, if it doesn't happen locally, it doesn't happen. If it doesn't happen nationally, it doesn't happen. So that means really, I think, let us now shift from recommendation to scale. I think it was our Bangladesh RC who said, we're very good on the policy, we're very good on the recommendation, but we kind of, often we leave the table when it's about shifting to scale and embracing the politics. And again, I'm talking from experience on detention. It's hard, but now the moment has come. We have the guidance, we have the recommendations, we have the commitments, but member states need our help to actually deal with the politics, to bring public support. And that means we need to be there when the decisions are made. So final reflection really is, let us be more at other tables where decisions are made, and worry maybe a little less about our own table, how nice it is, how nice we are, how inclusive it is. Let's be at the table where decisions are made on vaccines, on climate, on inclusive recovery packages, on the rebuilding better agenda next year, because this is where I think we can contribute and make migration work for all. Thank you.
Thanks, Marina. Yes, for that impassioned call that we start doing more action-oriented work on the ground and turning the guidance into support for member states in practical terms, and also the areas that you mentioned we need to get together on, being more of a network, not just on paper. So very provocative words. Thank you for that insight. I'd like to ask Hakima Haithar now. I believe she's on the Global Coalition Migration. Are you able to turn your microphone and your video on, Hakima, and join us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll go ahead in the interest of time and try and keep it to 5 minutes. So I'm Hakima Haithar from the Global Coalition on Migration. The Global Coalition on Migration is a multi-sector, multi-stakeholder coalition. GCM members have been working closely with the UN Migration Network and are part of the working groups, including as co-leads. Some of the reflections we'd like to share based on our involvement in the various consultations, the listening sessions and the working groups are as follows. We would first like to reiterate the importance of the Compact as a human rights-based international framework, the importance of which was highlighted this year in the course of COVID-19, when the rights of migrants were negatively impacted in many cases. We appreciate the network's outreach to stakeholders, including civil society, in its consultation, listening sessions, preparations for regional reviews, and the invitation to the annual meeting. We would encourage the network going forward to plan ahead for the various stakeholder meetings to ensure more inclusive and wider consultation. We do recognize the challenges of global, regional, national coordination, especially during this crisis year. As a network of global and regional constituencies, we would nevertheless like to see strengthened efforts next year in not only engaging the regions more consistently, but also having regional concerns and experiences feed into Compact implementation at global level, driving comparative conversations and promoting promising practices. We hope that the guidance that is coming out of the various thematic working groups, such as regular pathways, labor migration, access to services, and alternative to detention, can be used as a tool for promoting such bottom-up engagement in the regions and at national level, using the network's region to galvanize support and interest, and preventing the guidance documents from gathering dust on shelves or hard drives. At the same time, we see the ongoing work of the core working groups, especially 2.1 and 2.2, on support for UN country teams and for national implementation plans as opportunities to provide space for thematic engagement as well. Regarding potential forthcoming thematic focus areas for the network, we would like to draw attention to 3 interrelated issues which are also connected to already ongoing work on GCM implementation in the current work plan, and 2 additional areas. The first one is a forum on the future of regular pathways. As the current thematic working group 3, regular pathways to address and reduce vulnerabilities faced by migrants, and 4, regular pathways to promote decent work, are developing guidance for relevant GCM implementation expected early next year. We do expect the post-COVID policy environment to continue to pose significant challenges to a forward-looking pathways discussion amongst member states and other stakeholders, in which access to regular pathways might remain artificially limited and or characterized by newly emerging pathways that cater primarily to very specific, narrowly defined needs identified by destination countries on the past pandemic area. Such a development would be, in our view, run counter to the original intent of the GCM, which envisioned the opening up of more regular pathways as a central element and enabling condition for safeguarding a wide array of ways for migrants. We'd therefore encourage the network to not abandon the pathways discussion when the conclusion of the work plans for thematic working groups 3 and 4, but to develop a plan for an ongoing progressive conversation among states and other stakeholders on this issue. The other issue is the linkages between the efforts of climate change and migration and displacement. And we're glad this has been mentioned by three of my fellow participants before, and also the DSG. While we expect the current thematic working group on strengthening states' capacity to expand regular migration pathways to deliver useful guidance that includes recommendation on how to apply such pathways to address and reduce the vulnerabilities of migrants, including those affected by climate change, and we expect subsequent piloting of this guidance to include countries and regions with relevant experience, additional network-level work that draws on ongoing regional initiatives to more explicitly link this topic with states' commitments in relevant frameworks such as the GCR, the Paris Agreement, and the Sinai Framework may help advance progressive migration policies on this topic, especially with a view to in-depth thematic discussion as the IMRF in 2022. Protecting migration data is also another area. We're concerned by the ever-expanding use of data, much of it now digitalized in migration governance, which has the potential to compromise the privacy, security, and dignity of migrants. It is, if not handled correctly and adequately safeguarded. We recognize the ongoing efforts of Thematic Working Group 1 on enhancing national capacities for data collection. We hope the network will be able to provide additional guidance on safeguarding privacy rights in the application of this guidance during 2021. Fourth, although gender is not an established working group, given the heightened vulnerabilities that migrant women have faced, which include abuse and exploitation, especially during this COVID period, we hope this is an area of focus that can be mainstreamed with the various working groups with adequate representation from relevant stakeholders. And lastly, race and xenophobia. This is also another area that the working groups have not focused on this year, given the BLM campaign, the heightened racial disparity in place for mobility for the various race groups, as well as the xenophobic attitudes towards migrants, especially during the COVID era. We hope this will be an area the network will focus on in 2021, as well as work closely with both states and non-state actors as per Objective 17 of the Compact to eliminate all forms of discrimination and promote evidence-based public discourse to shape perception of migration. In conclusion, for us to establish the ideals of the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, we truly need a whole-of-society approach, which means we need to work from more from the global, regional, national, and local level, and vice versa, with various stakeholders to ensure that the migrants' rights are protected and migration is indeed safe. I thank you.
Thank you, Hakima. You listed so many areas in which the network needs to focus on in 2021. I've taken some notes of those. I know my colleagues have, but certainly better engagement and better planning and really ensuring that we have the voices of the relevant stakeholders is, we agree, so critical. And I'm very happy you raised the issue of gender. The report that I mentioned earlier that ILO has come out with shows that women migrants on the front lines doing essential jobs in the care economy, working on saving lives from the virus, they're making 20% less on average than many of their national workers, and they're doing the same jobs. So really we have to focus on more attention to these issues. So thank you very much. I'm looking to see if our colleague, our last discussion starter, Mr. Didier Trabuc is on. He's the UN resident coordinator of the Eastern Caribbean states. I think he's been having a little bit of trouble, but if you could push the request to speak button, we can bring you onto the panel. I know that the technical people are trying to help you do this. So while there you are, fantastic.
All right, can you hear me? Good morning. Good afternoon for you.
Please, you have the floor.
All right, good. Thank you very much, Michelle, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Well, I'm finally glad that I could overcome those technical glitches. Very happy to be with you, and thank you for the invitation. I'll really make my intervention within the context of small island developing states, SIDS, and some of the issues at stake and how we can work together, UN with wider coalition of partners to address those key issues. But of course, this can relate to all the settings that you will experience and all that you have experienced based on what I would mention as examples. So first, I want to say that the SIDS and the Caribbean region have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19 and definitely more than many other countries, given that the socio-economic impact is very high with the GDP shrinking by double digits in many countries this year. And unemployment is rising to unprecedented levels due to high dependency on single economic sectors like tourism, for example. So youth are particularly impacted, but of course, other vulnerable groups are also at risk of being left behind. So in this context, the Caribbean migration challenges are very complex and have been made even worse by the socio-economic impact of COVID. So I would like to list some of the main migration challenges that we are observing structurally, but even magnified now, as I mentioned. First, a very high rate of outward migration because of various causes, economic situation, living conditions, natural hazards. And it is important to know that, for example, in the Caribbean region, 91% of the Caribbean migrants reside outside the region. So it results in a very complex migratory system, as you can imagine. And those high rates of migration in some country, particularly mirrored or are related to highly skilled migrants. So a key issue now is really how to attract skilled migrants back to support the socio-economic recovery and sustainable development following post-crisis of COVID. So the Caribbean economy is another region also that continues to have very high dependency on remittances, with remittances from diaspora contributing as much as 38% in a country like Haiti, or 2% in a country like Barbados, percentage based on GDP. And while there is no yet evidences on how significant is the decline in remittances in the immediate aftermath of COVID, this crisis is likely to have definitely an impact that will affect the economies of those islands. So on the other hand, intra-regional migratory patterns are putting pressures on economic and social services in receiving countries. And there is a major challenges for those countries that are already fiscally stressed due to the impact of COVID-19. Managing the increasing number, for example, of Haitian, Cubans, Venezuelan migrants in the region across the Caribbean is certainly an opportunity and an area for more intra-regional cooperations. I cannot avoid mentioning that small island developing states are highly vulnerable to external shocks such as climate change or, of course, pandemic as we see it now. Hurricanes are very frequent in the region. For example, in 2017, a country like Antigua and Barbuda faced the impact of the hurricanes Irma and Maria, forcing the entire island of Barbuda to be fully evacuated. And in 2020, the hurricane season closed with twice much more extreme events than the average. So all the above definitely have an impact on migration, either affecting migrants in the region, exposing them to greater degree of vulnerabilities, or triggering migration and additional brain drain from the region. So in this context, I would like to turn to three key priorities that I wish to highlight as possible key areas, amongst many others, of course, but key areas of work for the network. First, looking at and I join my colleague from UNFCCC, looking at the impact of climate change and environmental shocks on human mobility in SEEDS as a priority for the network within the within the context of COVID response. Environmental change have an impact on migration flows, we notice, and people have historically left places with harsh conditions, and the scale of such flows, both internal and cross borders, is expected to rise as a result of accelerated climate change. So a comprehensive approach is, I believe, required through strong policy coherence between multiple policy areas, from climate action to disaster risk reduction, urban planning to migration policy, but also from health support to regional cooperation in the framework of existing or perhaps new mechanisms to put into practice. And especially the situation of women, children, indigenous population would require a very targeted attention to address vulnerabilities. A second key area that I want to highlight is the issue of vulnerable migrants with the situation that is being magnified by the socio-economic impact of COVID nowadays. And perhaps the support from the network for improved border management related to irregular migration, both at the level of policies, but also building capacities of state agencies, will be critical. But the support to migrants already established in countries running the risk of being left behind or even stigmatized due to the COVID impacts, for example, unemployment, is also urgently required and equally important. The third point that I want to highlight is perhaps how we can capitalize on the diaspora to address sustainable development needs in SEEDS in the region, and perhaps that also applies to many countries having a high rate of migrants living outside their own country. So the diaspora community is something I believe to be working on offering incentives for migrants and their descendants to return to the home country or to invest in their country of origin through innovative financing, social impact investments, and many others. This is really key for achieving the SDGs, knowing that we are losing some of the progress and the gains that have been done in the past decade. So there is certainly a need for technical support for developing return migration policies or investment in home countries. I want to mention one of the programs that many Caribbean countries are very proud of here is the citizenship by investment, and that encourages individuals to acquire citizenships by bringing capital and investment to the country. So something to think of. And finally, I would like to end by mentioning an example of joint work within the context of the UN Development System reform to leverage broad partnership that can be also upscaled elsewhere. And in this context, here in the Eastern Caribbean, for example, the UN is prioritizing human security, because it needs our support to respond and adapt. And for example, we work together under the leadership of IOM, together with UNFCCC, with the support of the Human Security Trust Fund, to promote a human security approach to address specifically the multidimensional challenges that COVID-19 exposes in relation to environmental migration and displacement. So we, for example, focus on putting the well-being of migrant, displaced persons, and vulnerable communities at the center of the attention, but also advocating for the adoption of framework that can help in addressing these movements in a timely, adequate, and protection-sensitive manner. So to do this, certainly a multi-partner approach is to be followed with regional institutions, national governments, CSOs, and the communities themselves to ensure that no one is left behind. And I believe this is an interesting example for the network to think of, that can be put into, in order to put into practice policies and framework that we are promoting to make migration works for all and support the member states in a tailored manner. I believe this is really what they expect nowadays. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Glad you could join us to bring up those points in small island development states and the issues of climate change and disaster, and of course the Venezuelan crisis as well. So there are so many other issues that you've indicated need support from the network. So thank you very much. I'm aware that we have a very large list of speakers. That's a good thing, but I would remind the speakers, I'll be calling on you a few at a time. Once I call your name, please hit the request to speak button so that you can be lined up. Turn on your videos, and then when it's your turn, please turn on your microphone. In the queue, I have Ambassador Evan Garcia. I hope you're with us, Ambassador. I have His Excellency Alejandro Davalos, Deputy Permanent Representative of Ecuador. I have Shannon Lederer, who's the Director of Immigration Policy for the AFL-CIO, American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations. And I also understand that Canada would like the floor. We have a number of other speakers after that, but that might start us off. So Ambassador Garcia, welcome.
Hello, can you see me?
No, we don't see you. We would love to see you. If you could turn on your video.
What do I do? Here? Hold on, guys.
And if the other speakers I listed want to turn on their video, they'd be right in line. Thank you.
Just a second, Michelle. Does it have a light? Okay, anyway, I don't want to waste the time of people. So it's okay if you just hear my disembodied voice. At the outset, Michelle, allow me to call you Michelle, our chair. I'm surprised and very happy to see many old friends. Among them, of course, Ovais and Pedro, with whom I have worked before, and to pay my respects to Undersecretary General Amina Mohammed and our beloved DG Antonio Vitorino of the IOM. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the UN Network on Migration for the excellent work over this incredible year. The Philippines early on welcomed the invitation to be a GCM champion. As we have said before, the 23 objectives of the GCM reflect the common understanding, shared responsibility, and unity of purpose we collectively aspire to, despite our being in different places on the spectrum in terms of implementing these objectives. Having this wide spectrum of champions and prospective champions means we can collectively advocate for all the objectives of the GCM from our own experiences and interests. We have been privileged to serve the inaugural steering committee of the Migration Multi-Trust Partner Trust Fund and have seen how diligently and sincerely the fund management unit has approached their work, engaging all sectors in a transparent and consultative process to craft the manual of operations, steer the group towards policies and priorities that align with the 5 thematic areas, and help country teams develop joint programs that can represent the fund well. As discussed in the previous session, we congratulate the IOM, ILO, and UN Women for submitting the Bridge Program, one of the first 6 pilot projects funded through the MPTF, which will be launched in the Philippines today. The joint program was crafted by the 3 organizations in cooperation with the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs, Labor and Employment, Trade and Industry, and in collaboration with Migrant Forum Asia, a major civil society migrants group in the region, among other agencies and civil society organizations. As was shared earlier today by Mr. Gustavo Gonzalez, the MPTF is pure innovation that builds toward the achievement of UN's reform agenda, specifically the holistic approach from the UN country team. We are hopeful that the pilot project will be able to demonstrate the whole of government, whole of society approach towards achieving Objectives 8, ethical recruitment, and Objective 21, return and reintegration, and that lessons from the pilot will allow us to invest in the scale up in our national capacity moving forward. As we have said before, the Philippines has mainstreamed the GCM into its National Development Plan through a new chapter on international migration and development. The metrics for achieving the goals of Chapter 21 are closely aligned with the objectives of the GCM to simplify the reporting requirements of the compact. For the Philippines, the focus remains on pathways for regular migration, decent work, ethical recruitment, labor mobility, combat trafficking in persons, and strengthening international cooperation and partnerships for safe, orderly, and regular migration, Objectives 5, 6, 10, and 23 of the GCM. And allow me here to observe that all of these are cross-cutting and involve many agencies, especially the ILO and the IOM. We are heartened with the recent developments in the Middle East, where attitudes to policies that inhibit labor market mobility and fair migration, such as the kafala system, appear to be softening. We hope that the easing of these measures will trickle down to the domestic labor sector, who are the most vulnerable. COVID-19 has been a significant challenge for all of us. We need not spend time on elaborating these problems. It has also shaken systems. Pandemic-driven repatriations have topped 300,000 in the Philippines, costing the government over $20 million just on transport. Seafarers have been most immediately affected by the pandemic, hence our work with the IMO to provide green lanes for safe changes of seafaring crews to support global supply chains. The Department of Labor and Employment has been leading the effort to provide gainful employment and entrepreneurship options as a means of reintegration. The government is also engaged in the largest ever social security budget program in our history as a consequence of this pandemic. Repatriations causing something of a labor demographic shock, to quote the UN resident coordinator in the country. It is for this reason that Objective 22 mechanisms for the portability of social security entitlements and earned benefits is also of keen importance, so that those who have returned can expect the health and social benefits from the social security packages they have contributed to and earned in their years abroad. As the global community has come together in solidarity to prevent, control, and mitigate the impacts of the pandemic, it is saddening that we are also called to counter the negative narratives on migration that have found confluence between migrants and the spread of the virus. As the vaccines begin to be rolled out here in the West, we hope that migration status is not seen as a factor in the vaccine intervention programs. None are safe until all are safe. In this regard, our advocacy work on the GCM as a champion country will be focused on these objectives, and we look forward to working with the network, with Jonathan and his team, on articulating how the Philippines will be supported here in Geneva at UNESCAP for the regional review at the sub-regional level and the national level, building on these themes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Very good sentiments to keep in mind as we move forward. I'd like now to please call on Alejandro Davalos. Thank you for turning on your video. I see you, and you have the floor. After will be Shannon Lederer, and then please, if I could call on Dan Cochran. I'm sorry about that, Dan. From Canada, if you could get queued up and request to speak. Thank you so much, Ecuador.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I will be speaking in Spanish, so I'll give you some time to change the setting. Agradezco a la...
Thank you to the UN Network for Migration for organizing this session. We acknowledge the advancement, the developments that have taken place. The tools have been developed, and the establishing of 40 networks for migration is very appreciated. And we also appreciate the work of the network to strengthen the cooperation between the UN agencies and the avoidance of duplicities. The IOM has been important in this effort, and we acknowledge that work. The next, in a recent report of the Secretary General of the UN, says that the impact that our challenges are more important than ever due to the COVID. The policies have to be aligned to the GCM, such as the construction of a positive narrative about the contribution of migrants who deliver essential services. I want to share briefly 4 ideas. First of all, it is essential to have the guide from member states and relevant stakeholders on the implementation of the pact. From the perspective of Ecuador, as a member of the Executive Committee of the Multi-Party Trust Fund for Migration, it is necessary to improve understanding on the ground at all levels on the spirit and scope of the objectives of the compact. This will result in the full implementation of the Covenant's 360-degree vision and a significant strengthening of the national efforts to improve the protection of migrants. Secondly, it's important that the work of the network supports and complements the work of other regional processes and mechanisms, so as not to lose sight of the challenges and trends related to addressing the particular needs of migrants in each context. It is important. The regional reviews are an opportunity to identify gaps and exchange lessons learned, as well as consolidate these experiences. Third, there is a need to maintain this momentum towards the International Migration Review Forum in 2022. We believe that the International Dialogue on Migration 2000 and 2021 is the appropriate space to draw a roadmap for the global meeting. In addition, the conclusions of these meetings will enable the identification of specific needs in the regions and an informed decision on areas where additional efforts are necessary to build capacity. Finally, the discussion on the objectives of champion countries should continue in 2021 in order to define how the network can support this group of countries. Also, this group could advocate for the inclusion of references to the Covenant in relevant multilateral fora and decision-making processes, including the Human Rights Council, the International Labour Conference, the World Health Assembly, and the High-Level Policy Forum on Sustainable Development. In conclusion, I wish to reiterate that Ecuador will continue to support the migration network in fulfilling its mandate and will work with the champion countries on joint actions to increase the visibility of the pact as the appropriate coordination and cooperation framework for managing human mobility. Thank you very much.
So much for joining us today and for your very good words about the 4 areas that the network should engage in. I now turn to Shannon. Good to see you. I know you're calling in very early from Washington, D.C. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and sending my solidarity to everyone out there and to your families in this incredibly challenging time. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share a few reflections from the perspective of trade unions. We place great importance on the work of this network, and we hope that it intends to take concrete steps to address the stark realities of the pandemic impact that were laid out in the ILO report and just resurfaced at the start of this discussion. We know that that will require a serious effort to address the structural failings that have allowed such egregious disparate treatment of migrant workers. So I think from our perspective, this requires a renewed commitment to promote decent work for all, regardless of status, by removing barriers to freedom of association, the right to organize, and access to social protections. It also demands that we address the exclusions that have left so many migrants unsupported by acknowledging the urgent need for robust regularization programs that bring migrant workers under the full protection of labor and employment laws. And it means that we must stop confusing regular pathways with safe pathways. The pandemic has exposed the abject failure of the dominant model of circular temporary migration programs that have left millions of migrant workers stranded without work, unable to travel home, but deprived of income, support, and social protection. They were in regular pathways, but there's nothing safe about what they have experienced. And we cannot continue to promote a model that makes workers into disposable commodities in our global economy and allows movement between countries, but not between employers. So we see this as a critical time to promote new models for movement that embed rights and universal social protections and afford workers of all wage and skill levels a path to permanence. To address these issues moving forward, we hope the network will embed meaningful social dialogue at all levels, national, regional, and global. Only through tripartism will we establish better outcomes for all. And in a period of heightened vulnerability to recruitment abuses, we urge states to align with the ILO's Fair Recruitment Initiative framework and avail themselves of the multilateral supervisory aspects available to protect migrant workers. Finally, we just want to emphasize on the theme of bilateral agreements that they should be seen as a means of securing and enhancing migrant workers' rights, but not and never as a substitute for urgently needed humanitarian resettlement. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some reflections.
Thank you so much, Shannon, raising all of the important issues, of course, that are central to ILO's work and to the work of the network, which has taken on many facets of this. And I think we're calling for a deepening of that next year and a much more solidarity with everyone to get this agenda going. So thank you so much for joining us. Dan, I see you, which is great. And Canada you will take the floor in just a moment. I want to look at the list of speakers I have to see if you could please hit the request to speak button and get ready to turn on your video. I don't think David Kudura is here. Jenny Henry from the International Migration Research Center, Stella Opuku from Afford, Harsith Burke from UNODC. Please, if you hit the request to speak button, we can get you in line. So apologies, Dan Cochran, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can you hear me well? All right.
You're having a little trouble. We're having a little trouble hearing your voice. If you could turn the volume.
Yeah, I'll try that. Just hang on a second, please. Sorry, the technology. Can you hear me now? Better?
I don't know. Ben, are you able to turn the volume up from where you're at?
Yeah, I'm trying. Just a minute. How's
Perfect.
that now?
Yep.
Is that better?
we got it. Gotcha.
Better now?
It was better. It just went off again.
Okay, just a second. Is that better?
It's just very, very weak.
I'm sorry. How is that now?
No, it's yeah. I know. Yep, that's it.
Okay, perfect.
That's it. You got it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you again for the opportunity to attend this meeting, Michelle, and allow me to begin by thanking the network for all the work that's been done over the course of the past year in supporting the implementation of the GCM. There's been some serious challenges, to say the least, over the course of the past year, but we've also been reminded of the vital role that migrants play in our societies. Canada has always been a strong supporter of the GCM, and we remain fully committed to its principles and its objectives. And that's why Canada enthusiastically accepted the invitation from the UN network to act as a champion country. Along with our fellow champions, and I'm glad that a couple of them were also able to speak today, we are optimistic that we can be helpful in advancing the objectives enshrined in the compact. Canada has adopted 5 priorities in its role as a champion country. The first, integration and social cohesion. Second, balanced narratives on migration. 3, the creation of more regular migration pathways. 4, a gender-responsive approach to migration management. And 5, cooperation for returns and reintegration. And today I just wanted to focus specifically on concrete actions that we are taking to tackle current and emerging challenges. So first of those is the advancing the creation of more regular pathways. Canada is a strong supporter of well-managed migration. We believe that strengthened international cooperation can lead to the creation of more regular migration pathways, which provide predictable and safe opportunities for migrants, while at the same time allowing states to realize an economic benefit and to meet their labor market needs. While there is indeed light at the end of the tunnel, with recent news of vaccine development, there's no doubt that economic recovery and growth remain daunting challenges ahead for all of us. Canada strongly believes that states benefit from well-managed migration systems that promote the use of regular and safe migration pathways, and should remain committed to creating these regular pathways for migrants, perhaps now more than ever, as we all plan for our post-pandemic recovery. On promoting a gender-responsive approach and exchanging best practices, Canada will advocate for a gender-responsive implementation of the GCM, which cuts across various GCM objectives, and for this to receive future emphasis as a thematic priority. This is key to ensuring that we follow through on the recognition that women, girls, and marginalized groups experience migration very differently than men and boys, and act to ensure that their human rights are respected and that their voices are heard throughout the migration process. On this note, Canada is very pleased that the Gender Hub, which is a project funded by Canada and led by a Canadian academic at the International Migration Research Centre at Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada, will be featured in the Migration Network Hub. The Gender Hub will be a web-based guidance tool and resource bank for governments and other stakeholders to facilitate design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of gender-responsive migration policies and practices. And finally, as you may also heard us speak about Canada's ongoing commitment to promoting balanced and evidence-based narratives on migration. So addressing the public narrative on migration is central to our efforts to strengthen social cohesion, to counter racism, and to build public support in order to welcome migrants as key contributors to our communities and economies. And we've heard many people mention that today. Over the course of the past year, Canada has been working with the Global Forum on Migration and Development to help advance the international dialogue on migration narratives. Leveraging the multi-stakeholder structure of that forum, we've led the creation of a working group on public narratives on migration, which we now co-chair along with Ecuador and with the GFMD Mayors Mechanism. The group includes states, cities, civil society groups, businesses, and international organizations. So it really is a whole of society effort. While this working group will be moving forward on a number of projects over the coming year, the one that I want to share with you today is that of the creation of a global digital communications campaign. This campaign, which is called It Takes a Community, will use storytelling methods to engage countries, cities, businesses, organizations, and individuals in sharing their own stories online about the positive impact that migration can have on communities. In order to achieve this, we have been working closely with the IOM and other communications experts to create a digital toolkit of resources that may be customized and repurposed by users. This toolkit includes social media templates, shareable images, and sample messages, among other resources. The goal of the campaign is not to take a myth-busting approach or to prove opponents of migration to be wrong. Instead, we want to elevate the positive side of migration through everyday stories that help to break down the divisions between us and them. So we're proud to announce that a soft launch of the campaign will take place this Friday on International Migrants Day, with a full launch planned for early 2021. It truly does take a community to change the narrative on migration, and as such, Canada would like to take the opportunity to invite all member states and other stakeholders, our community, to join this collaborative effort throughout the course of 2021. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank the network once more for the opportunity to speak today. Even though there is lots of work that remains, we remain optimistic that the Global Compact has given us the tools that we need to tackle the diverse challenges that we face, to contribute to our economic growth, and that we leave no one behind as we take on the task of post-pandemic recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. You certainly listed so many areas in which Canada is taking up leadership. So thank you very much for relaying the new initiatives that you're engaged in. I have both Jenna and Harshit online and on with us. I think Jenna, you're first, and then Harshit. And I would ask also if Stella could get ready to come on after that. And I have Felipe Gonzalez Morales, our special rapporteur, who I think is also online. So thank you very much, Jenna. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And thank you also to the Secretariat and to the network for the space to speak today. My name is Jenna Hennebrey, and I'm from the International Migration Research Center, and I'm actually the lead of the Gender Hub project mentioned by Dawn Cochrane from Canada, alongside and being co-developed with the Women in Migration Network. And so obviously I'd like to bring the discussion back to a discussion around gender, if possible. I've been a founding member. I was a founding member of the expert working group addressing women human rights and the Global Compact for Migration alongside Women in Migration Network and UN Women. And I think we all know that gender affects all migrants throughout all stages of migration, and that it has uneven consequences, particularly for women, girls, and gender diverse migrants. And we also know that, a lack of insufficient data on gender aspects of migration and gender inequality translates to neglecting the contributions of these migrants to the world's social and economic growth. And this will be particularly important as the world moves towards recovery from the pandemic and the focus on vaccines as well. And to echo the Secretary General's remarks earlier this month, I think it's this month, it seems like it's gone really quickly, gender inequality has been made more visible by the pandemic, and it's more important than ever to adopt a gender responsive approach to migration. And actually, it's that reality that led to 21 mentions of gender in the Compact and the guiding principle of gender responsiveness in the GCM. But to echo the sentiments of Verena Krause from UNICEF and others earlier, the document itself doesn't provide all the answers. And in fact, there's still some confusion even about what gender responsiveness means. So it will not happen by accident, despite the clear commitment and efforts of so many stakeholders across the network, the Secretariat, the civil society liaison, the working groups, and obviously champion countries like Canada, to keep this issue to the fore of our thoughts and top of mind. We need to ensure that gender responsiveness gets operationalized in practical ways. And I think it requires purposeful effort and a coordinated action. And it requires building capacity and sharing resources, something that obviously the Knowledge Hub will be a valuable resource for and is going to be discussed in the side event that follows. But it's vital to build on these positive conversations that have happened about trying to build agile and meaningful mechanisms to work with and beyond the working group format, I think, in a way that's cross-cutting. And one idea that Women in Migration Network colleagues and myself would like to propose is continuing the momentum that has been created around gender from the expert working group, and coming up with something that models the UN Migration Network's broad stakeholder participation to structure gender into the network and strengthen engagement through something like a gender advisory group. And I think, to end on the note, basically, that in order for us to do so, I think we need to measure our impact as well. We want to make sure that gender is at top of mind, but we want to know that we've actually made a difference and not just like we've moved beyond words and those that appear in the compact itself. And so I think that we can most strongly measure the inclusion impact by the inclusion of women, girls, and gender diverse migrants in the processes of migration governance that affects them. And so I'd like to propose that there's a continued discussion about how to structure gender more solidly and practically into the work coming ahead. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And colleagues, I have now about 8 more speakers online. I would ask, please, if we could have everyone stick to 3 minutes in their presentation. That would really help everybody to participate. And really, Jenna, thank you so much for bringing up the issue of gender and your ideas for a new mainstreaming proposal. So Harshit, you had the floor. I see that our special rapporteur, Felipe Gonzalez, is also on, and I believe, Colin, you're on too. Are you going to speak instead of Stella? That's my notes here. So Colin Roger, maybe you could request to speak. So Harshit, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the floor. I'm with UNODC in the regional office for the Middle East and North Africa. So my intervention is going to obviously touch upon this region, but I think it's probably applicable to other parts of the world as well. What I really wanted to talk about was 2 issues, and I also want to say that the GCM and the network is really active in our part of the world. I want to thank ILO and other partners for leading it and supporting the work of the network. We've seen that with COVID-19 and the lockdowns and travel restrictions, there has still been movement. There's been no stoppage in movements for irregular migrants, as well as no negative impact on trafficking in persons. The point is that people are still moving, and in fact, smugglers are in fact moving to more irregular and taking more dangerous journeys as well. What we would really like is, if possible, that the network considers touching upon the issues of smuggling of migrants, as well as the related issue of trafficking in persons. These are both obviously highly vulnerable populations impacted by COVID-19, so there's a health crisis. But in our part of the world, there's also a range of other destabilization events. For example, the recent developments in Ethiopia, which are going to have an impact on labor movements, which are going to have an impact on movements in people, but also very importantly on trafficking in persons. We would appreciate if obviously the network can address issues around smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons, but also cooperation on border security, looking really at coordinating better on interventions, policy advice, and technical support to countries, if we can take joint positions on this. We think that the network, wherever possible, needs to be a little more nimble and react to situations as they develop. But this is, of course, not restricted just to the network. It probably belongs to the entire UN system. The fear obviously is that migrants, as well as victims of human trafficking, will have limited access to health services as the situation develops. But especially for victims who are controlled a lot of times by their traffickers, and they have very limited access to health, to legal services. So if this is something that the network could touch on. We've had some really good examples of cooperation in our region, but I will stop because I know you have 8 speakers after me. But I want to thank you for this opportunity and look forward to 2021.
Thank you so much, Harshit, and you get the award for coming in under 3 minutes. Thank you very much. We noted well the issues of trafficking, and it's so important that you raised them for us. Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants. Felipe, nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. You have the floor.
Thank you, Michelle. Nice to see you too. And thank you for the opportunity to address the audience. I would like to start by saying briefly that it is of utmost importance the GCM as a step toward a multilateral approach to migration. States isolatedly cannot address adequately the issue of migration, and joint efforts by states with the UN Network of Migration, participation of the civil society, national human rights institutions, and other stakeholders is really crucial in order to enhance public policies on migration. In this regard, we, the special procedures of the Human Rights Council and my mandate in particular, have been also working to contribute to implement the Global Compact on Migration. And in particular, I have been participating as a member of the steering committee of the Trust Fund, whose work was addressed in the prior panel, and also in two thematic groups for the implementation of the Global Compact. But in addition to this, I would like to mention some substantive issues in which my mandate is working, which are connected with the implementation of the Global Compact. First is the issue of migratory detention. In this regard, I have been working with the working group on this topic in order to ensure that steps are taken to make migratory detention of adults really the exception, and also to work to end the migratory detention of children. And in this regard, I presented a report to the General Assembly in October. So I expect that there's going to be some moves forward in this regard. 77 states of the world still have a migratory detention of children in place. Then there is the issue of the participation of the migrants in the civic space. In this regard, I presented a report on Freedom of Association of migrants and of their defenders to the Human Rights Council last July. There is also the issue of pushbacks, which is a worrisome trend in different regions of the world. I am currently working in the preparation of a report on pushbacks to be presented to my next presentation to the Human Rights Council next year, and for which I am going to make a call for submissions in the next couple of weeks. I'm also working on a report about the pandemic and migration, in which I'm going to address the different issues that have been mentioned here, including access to health services, problems of xenophobia, discrimination, etc., etc., etc. So I expect to have a lot of submissions and exchanges with different actors in the preparation of this report. And I also foresee to address in a future thematic report the issue of climate change and migration. This is an issue that was already addressed by my mandate 10 years ago, but I think that the increasing gravity of the situation deserves a follow-up on this matter that is also crucial, as many of the persons here have mentioned. Finally, I would like to stress two transversal aspects of the Global Compact on Migration that inspires my mandate, I think, which should be the key of the implementation. One is a gender perspective on migration, and the other one is the human rights protection of migrants as a center of the migration.
I think we may have lost Felipe. Ben, are you able to see that? Is it my computer, or is it not working? I think, Felipe, you need to refresh because we can't see you. Well, while the Special Rapporteur is perhaps fixing the computer. Let me move on. I do see that David Kudur is on, and then I'll give Colin the floor. David, if you want to, I know that you were earlier and he tried to find you but couldn't. Please, everyone, under 3 minutes would be great because we are ending in 5 minutes, but we might have the grace to have an extra 10 minutes. And then Colin, you'll be next. And after Colin, I have Neha. Good to know you're on, Neha. Laurel and Ricardo, if we can get all that in. But I don't know if we'll have time. Let's hope. So thanks, everyone, for being short. Hi, David.
Thanks, Michelle, and sorry for the confusion. First, so I have three points, 1 minute per point. The first one, since I represent UNDP, obviously we would like to insist on the importance of highlighting the connection between migration and development. We agree, we support totally all the work on human rights and protection. They are key. But sometimes we have the feeling that the network is missing or is not enough emphasizing this issue of migration and development. And for 2021, we think that it's very important, especially two aspects. The first one is socioeconomic integration and of immigrants and reintegration of returnees. We are actually preparing jointly with ILO and UNDP and the colleagues of the Secretariat a discussion paper on this issue and also solutions beyond the COVID-19 and recovery solutions. So this issue is very important, but also I think the point of diaspora's engagement. Diasporas could be more involved in recovery solutions in countries of origin, facing the consequences of the decline in remittances. So we should engage more with diasporas. So that's the first point, migration and development. The second point is we should also help our member states address the issue of border reopenings. This has been discussed on Monday at the principals meeting. It's really a key issue. There was a strong lack of coordination between countries when they started closing the borders. We know that there have been millions of stranded migrants around the world as a consequence of these policies. So now it's important that the network can help and support member states in planning and coordinating the reopening of borders. And then the third and last point is also, I think that we need to have more to strengthen the relationship with the academia and the researchers. We need more evidence-based policies. We have the knowledge hub, but it cannot just be a compilation of measures. We have to work jointly with the researchers to assess our actions, our programming, the policies, how they affect migrants' lives, and how we can have a better impact. So that will also be a last recommendation on working more closely with the academic world to improve our impact. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Right on time, 3 minutes. I appreciate that. And thank you for raising all of the issues you did, especially socioeconomic integration and obviously the need for that. Colin, I see you're on. Please, thank you for your patience. You have the floor.
Thank you, Michelle, and I apologize on behalf of my colleague Stella, who was slated to speak, but she had to run to something else urgently, so I'm stepping in for her on the fly here. Thanks, Michelle. First of all, just want to kind of reiterate and commend Jenna, and we support Jenna's intervention earlier about the mainstreaming of gender in the priorities. I think that's also important. And likewise, similarly, along that same tone, and this is the main point of our intervention, is to support Hakima's presentation at the start and the mentioning of mainstreaming race as a key priority across all the other priorities that the network would focus on. We think that's really important, but we also think it's something that should be focused on in and of itself. The Civil Society Action Committee has undertaken a series of dialogues, including with the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism, to better build our capacity and understanding about the intersections of race and migration. We feel it's something that's integral, it has historical roots, and it's very much a part of the structural system that that flows in the pathway of migration. And in order to adequately address that, we have been, in fact, privately and internally, sort of half-jokingly referring to Objective 24 as a priority for us. And we similarly feel this should be a priority for member states, for UN agencies working on the implementation of the compact, that we should integrate race not just as a mainstreaming of all across the other thematic issues, but as a priority focus and how we can understand what are the impacts of racism and structural inequality across the globe that impacts migration, and how we need to address that in order to address all the other aspects of migration. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Colin. And I think you've just taken the award for the shortest intervention with a punch, and taking that very seriously. Your suggestions about that, the terrible racism we're seeing increase during this period. Neha, nice to see you. I think you're also calling from Washington.
I am, Michelle.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Solidarity Center, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I'm going to try to take Colin's cue and be brief. As Michelle said, I'm Neha Mishra from the Solidarity Center. We're an international labor rights NGO. I would like to just make 2 quick points. First, just reflective. One, I just wanted to emphasize the importance of the UN Migration Network, and in particular, the Civil Society Liaison's Office. Because of the creation of that office this past year, we have been able to bring in more voices from the labor movement and from trade unions into the Global Compact process, as my colleague Abby McGill talked about yesterday, for example, from Central Asia, etc. And I wanted to reiterate the importance moving forward of the Civil Society Liaison Office at the network in making sure that more voices, especially voices on the ground that are representing workers and migrant workers, are able to be part of the process. The second point I wanted to make was just building on what a few other people had said, especially my colleague Shannon Lederer from the AFL-CIO and the trade union movement, to note the importance of, one, mainstreaming gender, as Jenna and Colin both talked about, but bringing in Colin's point, making sure that we mainstream gender from an intersectional feminist approach, that we're looking at all the different identities that come along with gender, including race and other issues. That's extremely important. But the most important point I want to make, and the last thing I'll say, Michelle, is the importance of not treating all regular migration programs the same. The UN Migration Network has done an amazing job through its policy statements and other work this past year of being innovative and sometimes bringing up the hard issues that are difficult to talk about. The pandemic, as Shannon has talked about earlier, has revealed the structural and institutional flaws in regular migration programs that make migrant workers vulnerable to all sorts of abuse. We can't go back to the way we were before the pandemic. The UN Migration Network, led with ILO, has an important opportunity to say that not all regular migration programs are the same. We should develop criteria to ensure that regular migration programs moving forward address the vulnerabilities that we saw during the pandemic, specifically things like tying worker visas to particular employers, not allowing visa flexibility, separation of families, not having coverage for workers under social safety net programs, income security, unemployment insurance, health benefits, occupational safety and health, freedom of association, etc. This is a time where the UN Migration Network, together again with the ILO, can take a lead in urging nations through a multilateral process to think of regular migration differently and to come up with criteria where we can even have a checklist. Does this regular migration program allow for freedom of association? Does it cover migrant workers under social safety net programs? Does it treat all workers the same and not discriminate among workers? Now is a time where we can really be forward thinking and take some of the things that we've been discussing around the pandemic and that the pandemic has shown a light on to change regular migration programs and make them truly fair and make sure that they truly allow decent work for all workers. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much. And I think you may know that we're coming out with a report at the beginning of next year on irregular migration, at least the ILO. That's, I think, going to be a good way to set the stage for maybe taking some of these discussions forward. Thank you so much for raising those very important issues not all, there isn't a one size fits all, and regular migration has to be unpacked. Certainly, we've seen the flaws of the pandemic in that way. Good to see Laurel here and Ricardo. I think Laurel, you're next, and then Ricardo from the Youth Migrants Group. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle, and I will famously, as everyone says, try to be brief. We've heard repeatedly over the last couple of days about the issue of vaccine access, and I think this will be a key issue for migrants for the next year, and therefore needs to be a key issue for the network. And we can already foresee a variety of issues of the impact of the relationship between the vaccine and mobility and the reopening of borders, has been mentioned by several colleagues today, including vaccine access for all, so humanitarian settings, detention settings, in the context of returns and removals, but also fully firewalled vaccine access and provision of documentation on vaccine status that's also fully firewalled. But also, until there is universal vaccine access, and we know that's a way off, the human rights impacts of the vaccination requirements on mobility need to be assessed and understood. And I think it would be and where possible, preempted. And I think it would be useful to look at how the network could begin to think about how to preempt that, how to ensure, for example, that regular pathways remain open even where there isn't proof of vaccination for people, or even where people can't access vaccines. What does that mean in relation to labour pathways, but also what does that mean in relation to protection, like pathways to protection and people seeking access to territory for the purposes of protection. And I think it would be useful to see maybe from the network something like an early statement that lists some initial minimum criteria for inclusive and human rights-based vaccine access programs and vaccine mobility requirements, and then a working group to build from there, looking potentially at something that is more horizon scanning or risk assessing. Let's not wait until these things happen and we see what the human impact is of them. Let's look at what we know and what we think might happen. How could the network have in the first quarter of next year some kind of risk assessment, and then from that prioritize what policy tools or what other outputs from the network may be of use. I would echo the call from others on the need for work on racial justice and migration governance, and I wonder if this cross-cutting issue could be worked on through something like a consultative group that could be initially tasked with helping shape messaging on this, but then also identifying ways that the network could be more active. I think thinking about not just what's active and what's in a pipeline, but how do you move something from pipeline to active so we don't come back in a year and say we pipelined this, now is it time for it to be on stream? What is it that meant it was in a pipeline? Why wasn't it ready yet? And how do you move from one to the other? Again, moving from one thing to another, moving from the regional reviews into the International Migration Review Forum, I think there's a whole stream of work that's about coming to the IMRF ready for something that's ambitious and aspirational and not just a self-reflection on what's happened in the 4 years since the GCM adoption. I think that will require energy and attention to reignite a sense of confidence in dialogue on divergent issues around migration, which was fostered in the run-up to the GCM and which I think needs active attention. And that's just to reflect finally on a point that's come from others as well about spaces for dialogue and how that can be explored in the next while within stakeholder groups, between stakeholder groups, and really maybe trying out some different ways to do that. You have a call at the beginning of this for us to be interactive. There are other ways to try and create intentionally interactive spaces, and I think trying that out in the next year would be a good use of the network's time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurel, for raising those very important issues and just sharpening the issue of vaccines and racism, as so many have mentioned. Ricardo, you have the floor. Thank you for your patience.
Don't worry, I thank you very much, Michelle, for giving me the floor. It's an honor for me to be able to contribute from a youth perspective in the UN network space. My name is Ricardo Chica, and I am part of the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, UNMGCY. For those of you unfamiliar with us, it is the UN General Assembly mandated official mechanism for youth to meaningfully engage and participate in the UN system. As a youth network, we are currently contributing to and supporting the GCM review and its implementation. This year, we have consulted 145 youth-led and children and youth-focused organizations within 79 countries and representing 80,000 youth on key migration issues. Following the consultations carried out this year and before, we would like to share with you our findings that directly affects migrants from an emphasis on childhood and youth. COVID has made work on implementing the GCM more and not less urgent. We already have solutions at place. For instance, the initiatives that young people around the world have been taking to involve migrant children and youth are paying off. For example, creation of spaces for dialogue about migratory procedures and implementation of education campaigns on human trafficking preventions. This demonstrates the innovative potential, drive, and useful information that young people have. That is why we encourage governments and international organizations to include young people in decisions that affect them. There are also some key areas we are urging action on. The transnational recognition of skills and continuous development of capacities must be ensured with the right policies and flexibility to different home countries' contexts. It is necessary to facilitate the access routes to documentations or flexibility for lack of people who had to leave their countries, especially when due to human rights violations that threaten their life and safety. And not only then, without the flexibility to account for different access to documentations, we are missing out on the education and the skills of migrants moving from country to country. We have seen now that many migrants' qualifications as medical doctors have been recognized due to the crisis in many countries. It really shouldn't take a global crisis to recognize that their skills are valuable. Transnational recognition of skills must be facilitated. Quality education is a right of every child as enshrined in the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as in the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda. Regardless of their immigration status, children and youth must have access to education based on the principle of the best interest of the child. This requires efforts at the national and regional levels. Discrimination against migrants has been reflected even more during the time of the health crisis due to COVID-19. This translated into the lack of access to basic rights such as housing, health, education, and decent working conditions. That is why host countries have to actively work to stop the spread of xenophobia of migrants and refugees in the street situations and develop mechanisms of participations among the different spheres. It is important to keep in conjunction with the international community to implement a coordinated strategy of regional and international scope, which must be based on shared responsibility and the approach to human rights. I appreciate your attention, and from the UNMGCY, we are very pleased to be able to collaborate with you to recognize the voices of children and youth in those decisions that affect us.
Well, I would say thank you very much, Ricardo, because I know you've been active, and I hope you keep it up and hold us to account for next year. So thank you so much. Colleagues, we are coming to the end of our session. We have one last speaker, and please accept apologies from all of us and the organizers and the network. I know some of you also would like to take the floor. There isn't enough time, but please could you post documents in the chat or send documents to the Secretariat, and they'll hopefully be able to circulate them. We really do want to hear from everyone, but I think time now, we're 15 minutes over, and I'm going to ask our Bangladesh colleague from the mission here, who has a few last words. And then I'll turn the floor over to Jonathan, who will have the unenviable task of summarizing and closing us out. So thank you. Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michelle. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I thank the panelists for insightful deliberations. Bangladesh is an active promoter of safe, orderly, and regular migration. We are among the few pioneer countries which facilitated the network country team at national level immediately after its formation. We have joined the club of champion countries with a view to continuing our contribution to the GCM implementation and follow-up mechanisms, in particular through a greater engagement with the network. We have witnessed the serious vulnerability of migrants during the pandemic. This has reminded us of the necessity of a right-based migration governance through a whole-of-society approach. We feel that despite some global initiatives in recent years, there are significant gaps in the governance of labor migration in particular. Some key elements to fill the gaps are lack of cooperation between the sending and destination countries, mostly when it comes to the question of private sector cooperation. RCPs can chip in better here, I think. One of the major concerns surrounding the labor migration is serious lack of sufficient legal frameworks in the destination countries to protect the rights of migrants, including their lives, livelihoods, and health. We believe the network needs to work a lot, in particular with the destination countries, to promote migrants' protection. I think a constant civil society drive is also important here. Another important aspect is the nature of the future work, which has also been more challenging in the COVID context. First and foremost, we cannot deny the significant role of all migrants, skilled, semi-skilled, or unskilled, to the sustainable development. Two things. One is skilling the migrants already in employment to be prepared for future work. Second, to support the sending countries' initiatives to skill the potential migrants to meet the future demand. Network and its member organizations, individually and collectively, need to work to address these elements, among others, within the scope of the GCM objectives and the thematic priorities of the work plan of the network, and beyond where needed. Bangladesh should remain ready to render full cooperation to the network to this end. I thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much. And that is also one of the shortest but most concise and eloquent statements. I think a good one to end at least our portion of the session on. And Jonathan, good to see you. I will turn this session over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And I have to say, on a personal level, we've seen some fantastic moderating over the last 2 days. It's not an easy task. I think you've been absolutely fantastic at marshalling all these different and really informative and engaging presentations. So thank you really hugely. I will not take up much time. Our parents always told us we got square eyes if we looked at the TV too much. So I can imagine all our eyes after 2020 are pretty square. There's a few points I'd like to just make in terms of bringing together some of the threads of the conversations over the last 2 days. One is the importance of the building blocks that we have put in place and are putting in place. And these are you, our partners and stakeholders, and how we can expand this group, bring new voices in. I remain concerned that we acknowledge the need to hear from migrants themselves in the classic language, but are we really doing that? The extent to which we are truly bringing in those people whose challenges we are trying to find solutions for. Another building block is the regional reviews. Laurel just referenced them, many others have referenced them, and how we build really dynamic processes of review leading to a IMRF, a global discussion that is meaningful, that is ambitious, and provides the platform for the next 4-year cycle of the Global Compact. Another building block would be the work that we are beginning to do and hopefully will accelerate and intensify in the course of next year at the country level. Many thanks here to those states who have agreed to become champions of the GCM. This is an open invitation. We very much look forward to expanding that grouping in the course of the next 12 months. We're looking forward to working with them and others in piloting some of the tools and guidelines that we've established, including through the UN country teams where networks are in existence. And following the model that we're beginning to see emerge through some of the working groups to really nurture and facilitate that process of peer-to-peer exchange. And we'll get a chance to listen a bit more about that in the next session. No, you are not free yet, because following this will be the launch of the Global Migration Network Hub. A few other elements of building blocks that I would like to emphasize, if I may, is the importance of local authorities. This has been a current through these discussions. I'm very pleased to hear the interventions that have emphasized that. I thought Victoria's intervention in the consultative forum on the MPTF was particularly enlightening and instructive in this regard. And that's my final building block, of course, is the fund. It's one piece in our process, but it's a very important piece, and how we can nurture that and expand it, I think, has to be a priority moving forward. But beyond the building blocks, I think there is a really vital issue, and this is my second point. It's how we can refocus on or strengthen our focus on impact. Of course, these building blocks only have meaning to the extent they impact the lives of those we are seeking to support and assist. And impact requires many things. It's not always easy to gauge it. One of its key components, I think, has to be an element of agility, an ability to respond, an ability to anticipate, and a commitment not to be corralled by pre-existing ways of working. The working groups are one mechanism for that, but we've also heard, for example, in the context of gender and also racial justice, that there may be other more agile, more responsive mechanisms that we need to take a look at, whether these are advisory groups or some other sort of structure. And that's something that I would be very keen to take back to the executive committee and try to pursue. It's important also, and this was raised by Hakima in the context of suggesting a forum on the future of pathways, that the working group's outputs are sustainable beyond their immediate issuance. There is no point bringing together all of this expertise and collective brain trust to develop these very powerful tools if we don't actually have a plan for their longevity and implementation into the middle and further future. And then there have been a number of issues, substantive issues, that have been raised on a reasonably regular basis during the course of this annual meeting. I've mentioned gender, I mentioned the issue of race and migration. On that one, I'd like to inform you, just for your information, that the Secretariat will be engaging in a process of training in the first quarter of next year, ourselves, on how better to deal with issues of diversity and inclusion. Not simply internally as a team, how we work with each other, but also in terms of the issues we focus on and how we choose to focus on them. And I would encourage other members of the network, to the extent they're not doing so already, also to consider the same. Climate and migration has been a regular point of reference for us to consider focusing on in the coming period. And I think that's one that will be very difficult to ignore. And also, of course, finally, aspects around COVID-19. I think, again, referencing Laurel, she talked about universal access, which many have spoken about, but also what this will mean in terms of migrant mobility in the immediate future. A final point that I'd like to raise is the issue of voice. We've spoken a lot during the past days about challenges to migrants. Maybe we could have emphasized more the imperative for the network to play a protective role. And our collective voice does have a protective element to it that we shouldn't discount. I think we've made significant progress over the past 2 years in developing that voice, but I think there is much more that could be done in terms of our ability to be responsive in real time. And when I'm talking about our voice, I'm not simply talking about the issuance of statements, as important as they are. I'm talking about how we can more quickly, more efficiently develop lines for across the whole range of advocacy tools that we can bring to bear on a given issue, whether that be public statements or more private forms of advocacy. There, I think there is room for progress. In terms of next steps, I think everyone will be taking a few days off in the coming period, but we will harvest the ideas that have been shared with us during this meeting. We will take note of them, and we will be coming back to you with our proposed plan of action in the period ahead, including, importantly, how we make best use of the expertise and the support that we have through you. We have this fixed moment in the year, in the annual meeting, but whether there are other mechanisms for horizon scanning, touching base, touch points during the year that would allow us to course correct and benefit from your wisdom, those are certainly issues that I think we need to reflect on quite quickly. Now, all I would like to do most sincerely is to thank you all. These meetings would be nothing without your commitment, your willingness to sit in front of your computer screens for long periods, your engagement with ideas, not just in this discussion, but actually in the preceding 12 months, which have been remarkably intensive. But we couldn't have done an nth of what we have achieved, as modest as that may have been, without your support. So really, I am extremely grateful to you all. I wish you all and your families and your friends and your communities safe, happy, healthy holiday period, and very much look forward to reconnecting with you all in the coming year, where we have big challenges ahead, but I am hopeful we will be up to them. Finally, please do stay online. This is the launch now of our Global Migration Network Hub. It's an important piece in the overall GCM puzzle. And if we can call on your engagement for one more hour, I would be extremely grateful. Many thanks. And I will now hand over to the side event for the launch of the hub. Thank you. Bye-bye.